Tomorrow, petrol's going to be more expensive, but it's already bloody expensive tonight. Just checking before we came on air, the average price for petrol around the country right now, well, $2.19 is currently what you're going to be paying for unleaded. I know it's a little lower for E10 and a lot higher for diesel. Melbourne, $2.19, and in Brisbane, it is $1.99. But you can add more than a cent to all of that tomorrow. And this is way higher than when Anthony Albanese was whinging about $1.79 when he's the opposition leader, saying that petrol prices were surging on his watch. Well, what does he say about $2.19 versus $1.79? And as we know, the Prime Minister, any chance he gets, well, he talks about a problem that we know is the number one issue for Australians.
Now, we are doing something about cost of living.
But while he's doing something about cost of living with very slight tax cuts for the majority of Australians, tomorrow indexation kicks in, which means the price of petrol increases. It will increase because of the tax. Now, I apologise, on Thursday I bounced around a bit between 49.6 cents per litre and per dollar, but let's just focus in on the big number here. I had a few swirling in my head that night. I apologise. But the new tax is now 49.6 cents per litre. Your average Australian tank is somewhere between 50 and 60 litres, so you can do the sums. Now, if you fill up about once a week, it's $1,500 in petrol tax that you are now going to be paying as a result of this government not doing anything to change the price of petrol. Now, they could halve the amount of tax, as previous governments have, or they could delay the tax increase that will take place tomorrow, but they have not and they will not do it. So the reality for Australians who have a normal car and fill up about once a week, $1,500 is how much you give to the federal government. Now, of course, all of this is supposed to go back on road funding. But how many potholes are there, not to mention your street, but on your way to work, school or anywhere else? There seems to be a mismatch here. But surprise, surprise, the government giving with one hand, yet taking with as many others, like an octopus. 7 other hands finding ways to take it from you. So tomorrow, petrol goes up. And it goes up because the federal government chose for it to go up. Now, interestingly, all of this happened on the same day that Chris Bowen was not talking about this issue. Instead, most of the media, who probably didn't report the petrol's going up tomorrow, thanks to tax, they all would have got very excited today that old Casanova Bowen, dressed in black, because, you know, he's a cool kid. You know, he's like the Johnny Cash of Australian Parliament. Please. Well, they're introducing new fuel standards, which means any new car from halfway through this year to definitely the start of next year and beyond will have to meet higher fuel efficiency standards. Now, this means that certain cars will either not be allowed to come in or you'll have to fiddle with parts of the engine for that to end up being the case. But remember, this government just wants to get as many people to electric vehicles as possible, which is why they've introduced luxury car tax on hybrids. Now, of course, the extreme majority of cars on the road are not going to be new cars. They're going to be some form of used car. And at this stage, no plans to do anything about those fuel efficiencies, but about the cars that will be coming into the country. And what is the spin? That Chris Bowen is putting on a plan that, even if it happens, does not kick in until the 1st of July and doesn't get serious until the 1st of January next year. Well, he says you'll save this much.
The new vehicle efficiency standard is simply this, requiring car manufacturers to meet certain standards on grams per kilometre of fuel used. They can do that across their fleet, and we will require them to improve gradually but clearly over time the quality of vehicles they send to Australia when it comes to fuel efficiency.
Now, the claim in the media spin was that all of this will save you $1,000 a year when it comes to how many times you have to go to the petrol pump. But there's a little kink in all of this, isn't there? Supposedly, it's about making sure that your fuel goes for longer because of the fuel efficiency standards. Well, if so, why would they increase taxes on hybrid cars? Because they, of course, extend the fuel life of your car. They now turn around and say petrol savings of $1,000, but those don't kick in until a year after January the 1st, 2025. So the best case scenario is if you buy a brand new car January the 1st next year. A full year later, you'll apparently be $1,000 better off. But for the millions of other cars that are on the road from tomorrow, fuel taxes go up, and the total that you will be spending on fuel is 49 cents per litre. Almost said it again. Per litre, meaning $1,500 a year. You see how they say something, but they do something else? That's why I always say, ignore what they say, watch what they do, which is why we're focused on this each and every time. And reminder, that $1,500 a year that you spend on federal petrol tax, the bloke who supposedly is doing something about cost of living but won't do anything about the increase that he has introduced to fuel taxation, well, what's he giving back to low to middle income workers? Well, you know it by now. If it's $45,000, it's $15 a week. $60,000, $22 a week. $80,000, $32 a week. And more than $100,000, $41 a week. So let's imagine you're, let's say, the $22 a week better off. You're now turning around and having to spend $2.20 from tomorrow morning per litre on fuel. It's all hot air, it's all BS, but the media is doing their best to try to pretend that the same people who caused the problem are solving the problem, when we know it's not true. Now, when it comes to trust in the Prime Minister, we know it ain't great. There will be a news poll later tonight. We'll find out how wider people feel about the tax changes. But when the Prime Minister, 11 days after breaking his promise, is still being asked about broken promises, it's not going very well.
Why didn't you take this package to the election? You yourself were saying before the election, this was from your campaign launch speech, this is the worst inflation rate in 2 decades. You said families are struggling, worried about the future. Why didn't you want to give them more at the time? Why were you so wedded to the higher end tax cuts? Your word still your bond?
The best the Prime Minister has for the home game, that is, an interview on the ABC?
But I'm an honest person.
But will you be less categorical in promises?
I'm an honest person.
OK. You can say your word is your bond, but when you break the promise, your word is not your bond. You can say you're an honest person, but then when you turn around and say cost of living is the only thing I care about, but under your government, petrol taxes go up this week and you've increased taxes on hybrid cars as a way of people trying to not buy as much petrol because, as we've shown you, it's well and truly almost $2.20 a litre, people may not believe you. Now, you can say it as much as you want, and the press gallery backers can back you as much as you want. But I know that people have a very finely tuned BS detector, and it is going off louder and harder every time this bloke opens his mouth. But when he was pressed particularly about, well, hang on, if you're going to make a big change like this, why not back yourself in and take it to an election? Well, he says he doesn't need to take it to an election because he went to a far tougher place than the Australian people.
I've been really upfront, Dave.
You have. That's
one of the things that I have done is to go to the National Press Club and say, we have changed our position. Why have we done that? Because we've listened to people, and particularly low and middle income Australians are under pressure, under financial pressure. And what I can't do as Prime Minister of Australia is to wring my hands and say, if only there was something I could do about it.
Like taking $1,500 off 10 million workers, as you did in the budget last year. Like not cutting petrol taxes through all of the inflation problems of the beginning of this year. Or not increasing petrol taxes. Oh, but he went to the National Press Club. Oh, what a frightening experience for a Labor politician. Oh, hello, I represent The Guardian. Oh, this is going to be tough. Hello, I represent the ABC. Oh, how will I get through this? Hello, it's old mate from the Sydney Morning Herald. Oh, heaven forfend. Now, of course, when you want to make serious changes to tax policy that will actually change people's lives and the financial structure of the country, you do go to an election. Now, because this doesn't actually change anyone's life, instead it's about trying to save his political hide going into the Dunkley by-election and then, presumably, if they win it, a federal election later this year, let's compare and contrast Prime Ministers. Of course, John Howard, who had a thumping majority and could have introduced a GST any time he wanted to, but instead he decided to take it to the people in an early election about a year earlier than he needed to have one. You see, he was elected in 1996. They didn't need one until 1999, but he went in 1998. The Australian people ended up returning them with a reduced majority, but they endorsed the policy change. And speaking of politicians in 1998...
You can trim the eyebrows, you can cap the teeth, you can cut the hair, you can put on different glasses, you can give him a used milk facial for all I care, but to paraphrase a gritty Australian saying, same stuff, different bucket.
Couldn't have said it better myself about you, Albo.